This hearing will come to order. This hearing is fairly virtual, so we must address a few housekeeping rules. For today's meeting, the chair, the staff designee by the chair, may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purposes of eliminating background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, we'll ask the staff to send you a request to unmute yourself. Please accept this request so that you are no longer muted. A reminder to all members and witnesses that the 5 o'clock minute clock still applies. And there's a technology issue. We will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. If a technology issue arises, we will be moving to the next member quickly. So don't worry that I cut you off. We're just going to the next member, and you will retain your time. If you notice, a clock on your screen will show how much time is remaining. 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn yellow. 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that their time is almost expired. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red, and I will begin to recognize the next member. In terms of speaking order, we will follow the order set in the House rules, beginning with the chair and the ranking member. Then members present at the time the hearing is called to order will be recognized in their order of seniority. And finally, members not present at the time that the hearing is called will be placed in order. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything that they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. This email address has been provided to your staff. Today's Subcommittee on Defense will come to order. This afternoon, the committee will receive testimony on the Defense Environmental Restoration Program and accounts. Our 4 witnesses are Mr. Richard Kidd, Deputy Secretary of Defense for Environmental and Energy Resilience, Ms. Amy Borman, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Environment, Mr. Ohanesi Ihum, and sir, please introduce yourself and let everybody know how to say your name correctly. I fear that I have not said it right. But you are here with us as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Environmental. And then we have Ms. Nancy Bacchus, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Environment, Safety, and Infrastructure. I welcome you to the hearing, and I thank you for your service. This is the second time that the subcommittee's held a hearing on environmental restoration and remediation issues within the Department of Defense. I note that our very first hearing on this issue was exactly 1 year ago today. This is critically important that this subcommittee remain engaged because environmental cleanup is directly relevant to every single state in our nation, many of our congressional districts that we represent, and other places in which the Department of Defense has a presence. The impacts of environmental contamination on our communities, whether it be from hazardous chemicals or military munitions, is not a partisan issue. It's about the health and the safety of our service members and their families, our constituents who live in and around military installations. And it's the duty of the Department of Defense and the services to ensure that they are responsible stewards of the land in which they operate. Where contamination has occurred, the department and the services must ensure that those sites are responsibly cleaned up in a timely fashion to standards that meet the needs of the local community. It's our job in Congress to ensure that there's adequate funding and proper oversight of these cleanup projects. One of my hopes is for this hearing is for us to discuss how we can be collectively smarter and accelerate site cleanup. While answers sometimes can be more money, the president's budget routinely proposes to reduce cleanup funding, and Congress is left to restore the funding. And cleanup of hazardous sites and military munitions should not be used as a budget offset. It needs to be a serious priority for the department and not a second or third tier issue. Some of the topics for today's hearing I hope we can hear more about, including how funding is prioritized in the environmental restoration accounts, the cost to complete the Department of Defense cause contamination military munitions at current and former military facilities, and what constraints exist to speeding up this cleanup. In places where the department is the known source of contamination, How is the department communicating the risks to service members, families, and their neighboring communities to ensure those that are affected are aware and that their voices are heard? The scope of DoD PFAS cleanup. Where is the department identifying possible PFAS contamination at DoD installations? And how far along in the circular process is the services in remediating PFAS contamination? Given the tight time frame that we will have to write the bill, I ask that those of you who are testifying in your support staff be prepared to respond to members on any specific budget requests that are asked today. And that also includes the committee staff when they're asking for information. With that, I thank you for appearing before the subcommittee today to discuss these important issues. We'll ask you to present your summarized statement in a moment. But first, I'd like to recognize our ranking member, Mr. Calvert, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair McCollum. I appreciate your calling this hearing today. And Henry, good to see you. As all of us contest, there are few issues more important to the quality of life for our servicemen and women, their families, and their communities than healthy living conditions and assured access to clean drinking water. Defense Environmental Restoration Program addresses contamination from DoD activities and active installations, formerly used defense properties and base realignment and closure locations, many of them right here in my home state of California, and I know throughout the United States. The longstanding program addresses a broad spectrum of pollutants and other hazardous substances, including from unexploded ordnance. By far, the largest source of concern, as the chair mentioned, however, is the leakage of PFAS chemicals into groundwater and drinking water, community notification, as well as timely and effective remediation. Addressing the problem with PFAS has been a growing area of focus for Congress, as reflected in FY22 Defense Appropriation Bill, as well as the FY22 NDAA, both of which contain robust funding and other important provisions relating to cleanup, disposal, and study of PFAS. And this is certainly something that's personally important to me because I have a number of bases, both past and present. So in this regard, I'd appreciate the update on the work of the department's PFAS task force, including efforts to mitigate and eliminate the use of the current aqueous film forming foam and to assess the impacts of PFAS on human health. Finally, as Congress devotes more funding to the remediation and study of PFAS, it's also important that there is transparency and planning, budgeting, and program execution, as well as metrics for evaluation and cost estimates. Again, thank you for your appearance today. I look forward to your testimony. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you so much, and I couldn't agree with you more. So today we'll start off with Mr. Kidd. Please proceed, and remember, we do have your testimony in front of us. We've had an opportunity to review it, and so summarize it so that we have time for questions. So Mr. Kidd, please start.
Chair McCollum, Ranking Member Calvert, members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to provide a summary of the Department of Defense's Environmental Restoration Program. Thanks to strong and consistent support from Congress, totaling approximately $62 billion since inception, the department has been able to establish and maintain a mature, effective cleanup program. Indeed, we have completed work at over 85% of the total sites across the department. Nonetheless, the cost to complete the remaining sites is estimated to be just under $31 billion, and that some of the hardest sites and most intractable issues remain. While our program is broad spectrum in nature, one long-term significant challenge is how do we address per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS. At this meeting a year ago, I gave you my first candid assessment where I stated that physics, chemistry, and science establish the realm of the possible and dictate the parameters and pace of our work. My assessment remains unchanged today. It will be years before we fully define the problem and decades before it is completely cleaned up. Given this, we all recognize that we must be diligent in our work, sustained and persistent, seeking opportunities to accelerate our activities where we can, and continue to invest in research and development to expand our response options. Congress has been a strong supporter of our PFAS efforts, and we have allocated over $1.5 billion to date. With this money, we have achieved a number of results. In regards to cleanup, all sites where the Department of Defense was known or suspected to have released PFAS are now in the CERCLA process. That's 700 sites. 96 of those have been identified where no further action is required. 168 have moved to remedial investigations phase, and 62 more are expected to enter that phase before the end of the fiscal year. We have completed our testing of commercially available PFAS-free alternatives to AFFF. That information and data has now been incorporated into the process to develop a military specification for PFAS-free foam. Our research and development activities continue at pace. We started 50 new projects this year. This is the largest research effort in the federal government related to detection and cleanup. 30% of our cleanup related projects have now graduated out of a proof of concept and moving into demonstration and commercialization. In regards to public outreach, I have hosted and have been joined by my colleagues on this committee for 4 town hall meetings where we have met with communities and PFAS activists across the country. These meetings have been very informative and have improved our actions. We continue to seek further ways for improvement and how to revise the format of these events to meet the needs of your constituents. Internally, the department is taking a number of steps to improve our responsiveness. We are adding staff. We are revising our website to make it more data-driven and user-friendly, and we are reviewing our community engagement practices. Looking forward, I feel obliged to highlight for you, although many of you already know, the EPA is in the process of developing enforceable regulatory standards for certain PFAS in drinking water and expects to finalize them within the next year or so. These nationwide standards are expected to be much lower than current EPA health advisories and will have significant effects on the department's cleanup activities. EPA is working as quickly as possible to provide interim health advisories, and just 2 weeks ago, EPA released new screening levels. The department welcomes this work and the certainty that these standards will provide, but it will affect what we do. We will likely reopen past investigations, be required to install more extensive and expensive cleanup measures, and as a result, will generate more PFAS-containing materials for disposal. We are watching the topic of disposal very carefully. We would like to ensure that all pathways are available. We do not want to be in a position where we are faced with either curtailing our cleanup activities or storing materials on site because we do not have a clear disposal option. So in conclusion, I would like to thank the members of this committee for your strong support and interest in the department's environmental restoration program, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kidd. Ms. Borman?
Chair McCollum, Ranking Member Calvert, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the soldiers, families, and civilians of the United States Army, thank you for the opportunity to address your interest in and answer questions about the Army's Defense Environmental Restoration Account, or DERA. Our priority remains the health and safety of our service members, families, civilians, and the communities surrounding our post-camps and stations. The Department of the Army's Restoration Program is a mature program managed and executed by a team of soldiers and civilians from across the Army. I'm proud to report that over 90% of our restoration sites have reached the response complete milestone, which occurs when sites complete the proposed remedial action or require no further investigation. The Army appreciates the support you've provided to our restoration program over the years that's allowed us to reach this milestone. The remaining sites to achieve response complete are approximately 1,200 and spread across our active and our closed installations. To make the most impact, we continually reassess the cleanup program by addressing the highest risk sites first. At the same time, we're committed to achieving response complete at all of our sites. The Army's FY23 budget request funds requirements that protect soldiers, families, and civilians working on or near our Army installations. This budget allows the Army to continue to fund new and ongoing PFAS investigations and cleanup, fund projects with legally binding requirements, our ongoing projects, and projects that represent the greatest risk to human health and the environment. While the Army is proud of our successes and remains focused on continuous improvement of our cleanup program, we know that cleanup at many of the remaining sites is more complex and requires additional time and/or remedy based on more advanced technology. The Army has been identifying and conducting cleanup at sites since the 1980s and has come a long way. Still, we remain fully aware of the magnitude of our mission and look forward to continued partnerships with fellow federal agencies, state regulators, and industry stakeholders to increase the efficiency of our cleanup efforts. In addition, the Army is focused on responding to the challenges of PFAS and is resolute in making the substantial investment necessary to continue forward progress. We thank you for the support you've provided to date. We're diligently working on completing the initial phase of PFAS assessments at each of our 337 installations by the end of 2023, as required by the NDAA. We've completed preliminary assessment and site inspections at 30% of those installations to date. Where we've identified exceedances of the Environmental Protection Agency Health Advisory for PFAS in drinking water, we're acting very quickly to provide alternative water to the affected residents, and we're working with members of the affected communities, along with state and local health officials and regulatory authorities, to provide immediate action as needed, as well as long-term solutions. I assure you, the Army continuously seeks to ensure protection of human health and the environment. The Army is dedicated to being transparent about our cleanup progress with both Congress and the public. To that end, as we complete the analysis of our PFAS investigations, we're taking steps to make our PFAS cleanup progress and results more publicly accessible through our websites and through increased community outreach. The Army fully supports community involvement and outreach in the Environmental Restoration Program. We use the Restoration Advisory Board, or RAB, rule and the OSC handbook to guide our RAB activities. The Army is supporting 26 RABs currently, and we're reaching out to 39 additional communities this year, including those around PFAS sites, to determine if there's sustained interest in supporting a RAB. Our priority remains the health and safety of our service members, their families, Army civilians, and the communities surrounding our installations. We will continue to prioritize and address sites where risk to human health is the highest. I assure you that the Army is fully committed to addressing our cleanup responsibilities. Thank you for the opportunity to present this testimony and for your continued support of the Army.
Thank you very much, Ms. Borman. Mr. Onhen SC, I see your name. You said it for me last year, and it's a beautiful name. And I apologize. I can do a lot of Nordic names, but please, for the record, state your name in the correct way.
My last name is pronounced Ohanessian.
I was close. O-N-H-S-E-M. Okay. Please continue.
Thank you. Chair McCollum, Ranking Member Calvert, distinguished members of the subcommittee, my name is Carnegie Ohanessian, and I am the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Environment and Mission Readiness. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Department of the Navy's Environmental Restoration Program. The Department of the Navy's Environmental Restoration Program is a mature program with a well-established record of protecting human health and the environment through short and long-term response actions taken over the past 3 decades. We are proud of the substantial progress and many successes we have made at the department's more than 4,000 environmental restoration program sites. We have achieved the response complete milestone for 83% of our sites. The remaining sites are our most challenging sites and will require additional time to achieve final remedies, address new and emerging chemicals of concern, restore lands impacted by munitions, and complete long-term remedies that are in progress. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, continue to be at the forefront of the chemicals of emerging concern across the nation. The department is implementing a comprehensive strategy to manage and address the known or potential releases of PFAS from our activities on Navy and Marine Corps installations and facilities nationwide. We also continue to make progress in our munitions response program, cleaning up and restoring beneficial use of former military sites known or suspected to contain unexploded ordnance, discarded military munitions, or munitions constituents. We remain steadfast in working with affected communities and taking protective action to identify and mitigate the impacts of our releases to human health and the environment within the framework of the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. The Department of the Navy remains committed to exercising good stewardship of the environment while advancing our mission to defend and protect this great nation. I thank the leadership and membership of this subcommittee for your attention, interest, and ongoing support of the Department of the Navy's Environmental Restoration Program, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ohanesia. And I'd like to hear now from Ms. Baucus.
Chair McCollum, Ranking Member Calvert, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to provide a summary of the Department of the Air Force Environmental Restoration Program. Although I have only been in this position for 2 months, I have to say I'm extremely proud of the work that Mark Carell led before me and the outstanding work being done by our team. I'm excited to share with you our program updates. The main priority of our mature and effective environmental restoration program is to protect our airmen, guardians, civilian workforce, and all families who live and work on our installations and in our surrounding communities. We live, work, and play in the same communities in which we serve. We drink the same water, we live on the same dirt, and where our mission has negatively impacted people and communities, our first priority is to ensure that no one is drinking water above the EPA limits. Then we focus our attention on the cleanup of the soil and groundwater using a risk-based approach to address the long-term impacts to groundwater, soil, and surface water in accordance with requirements of the Federal Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, or CERCLA. I'm proud to report that over 85% of our restoration sites are at the CERCLA Response Complete milestone. The remaining 2,000 restoration sites require further investigation or cleanup, and we continue to work them aggressively. Our responses in all cases are based on the overall relative risk at individual sites. We rank all sites as either high, medium, or low risk based on the toxicity present at the site, the migration potential, and the presence of pathways to reach human or environmental receptors. We ensure the highest risk sites are addressed first. The cleanup of CERCLA sites is a complex process, which is why meaningful community engagement and involvement are a fundamental part of our cleanup program. We are committed to transparency about our restoration program with Congress, our state officials, regulators, and our local communities, and we utilize multiple venues to include formal restoration advisory boards to ad hoc community meetings, public-facing websites, and installation commander interactions. We're committed to providing all stakeholders validated and timely information on our cleanup activities. Although our program covers a myriad of contaminants, we recognize that PFAS, and particularly PFOS and PFOA, are a major concern across our nation. In recognition of this important national issue, we accelerated implementation of our CERCLA process to respond to PFAS by implementing immediate response action. This acceleration was made possible by the additional $370 million in PFAS targeted funds from Congress over the last 3 years. I thank all of you for your very generous support. To date, the Department of the Air Force has spent nearly $1 billion to provide the following: alternative drinking water at 39 installations, completed 202 preliminary assessments, 132 site inspections, and awarded 81 remedial investigation contracts. We will continue to make every effort to expedite the CERCLA process to complete our response. For the past 5 years, the Department of the Air Force has been aggressively looking upstream to prevent new PFAS impacts by implementing new DoD and Department of the Air Force policy initiatives restricting the use of the aqueous film-forming foam, or AFFF, for the following: We've retrofitted our fire trucks from the legacy AFFF to an alternative foam that has no PFAS and trace PFOA. We're limiting the use of AFFF for emergency response situations only. We use water for our training. We're treating uncontained accidental releases of AFFF as hazardous substance spills. We are ceasing off-installation use of AFFF in our mutual aid responses, and we are requiring the replacement of all AFFF fire suppression systems in our hangars with automatic water sprinkler systems. There will only be a very few exceptions. We have been and will continue to be as proactive as possible in addressing this national concern. The Department of the Air Force is fully committed to responsible environmental management, which includes assuring our airmen, guardian families, and surrounding communities are protected. Thank you again for the opportunity to meet with you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you all for your testimony. I'm going to recognize myself first for a question, and I'm going to suggest if you have a specific question that someone can answer, to ask them, but my first one's going to be rather broad. So here we go. As former chair of the Interior Environment Subcommittee, along with Mr. Calvert, when I served as his ranking member when he was chair, it's striking that we allocate more money to the Department of Defense for environmental cleanup than we do to the EPA Superfund. The defense bill last year included $1.5 billion for DoD's environmental restoration programs, whereas the EPA Superfund program only received $1.2 billion in total. Now, the infrastructure bill thankfully also provided $3.5 billion to the Superfund sites. So there is more to the story to be told yet. But this also speaks to the scope of the liabilities on the books for the Department of Defense. The DoD estimates the total bill to clean up all the known contamination with the Defense Environmental Restoration Program is $31 billion, $31 billion. So I would ask why the budget process has such a large reduction. It's a negative reduction, $408 billion to the environmental restoration programs, especially as in your testimony, you point out that you might have to go back and clean up to a better standard as we learn more about these contaminant materials. So why does this reduction seem to be a common occurrence year after year? I'm concerned that it creates an impression that Congress will be restoring the funds this year instead of the department making these activities a priorities in their budget. And I know you don't make the final numbers, so I know there's other people listening. I'm watching as to what's happening with these numbers and watching very closely. So here's my question, and you can get back to us in writing on this. What activities will not be funded under the proposed budget? The Army has a reduction of $103 million in its budget. The Navy has a reduction of $31 million in its budget. The Air Force has a reduction of $270 million in its budget. And the funding for formerly used defense sites is reduced by $65 million. So I would like you to get back in writing to us about what's not happening with that. But if you want to make a comment right now, I would be happy to hear. Mr. Kidd, maybe it would be you.
Good morning, ma'am. So thank you for the question. It's a very important topic. We will take advantage of the opportunity to provide full details back in writing. I would just say that the budget is primarily a bottom-up driven activity based on what we believe the needs are and what we can execute during the given year. I would also note that due to the high past funding that you all have provided for PFAS, we still have a residual amount of money in the transfer account that is available to address PFAS issues going forward. Unless my colleagues want to add anything, we will take the remaining details for the record.
So you're saying you're at capacity then for what you can clean up?
Ma'am, I'm saying that we have sufficient funding right now and in the budget request to meet our identified cleanup needs.
And I'm asking, is it an issue of your identified cleanup needs based on the capacity that you have currently? Or if you had more capacity, you could clean up more? You can take that for the record if you want.
All right, yes, ma'am, I'll do that. Thank you.
Okay. And then the other thing I would ask, we're going to have a second round for questions, so I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to answer something. I was at I've been on several of the air bases. One, I was up in Alaska. Particular cost that wasn't included in the total cost of an F-35 was making larger hangars. So when they dug up at Ellensdorf, when they dug up the dirt to make the larger hangars, they also dug up mounds and mounds and mounds and mounds of PFAS, which are just sitting there. When the cleanup is done, how is that cleanup accounted for? Do you have a separate account where you know you're going to have to go back and remediate and do something about the PFAS that you've dug up? Because when I look at like the Air Force's spend plan, I see investigation, removal, investigation, removal, investigation, removal. But if it's removed, it's not, as you pointed out, it's not done yet, because we still have to account for how we're going to either store, dispose of, or eventually, hopefully, maybe find a way to make this contaminate break down. How's that accounted for in the budgets? Is that considered completed, and then it's kind of like off the books, but it's not really off the books?
I'm prepared to defer to the Air Force, Ms. Bacchus, unless you would like me to try to answer.
No, the Air Force is fine. I just know that you kind of see the Air Force. It probably isn't the other place this is happening, but Ms. Bacchus, how does the Air Force account for something that is removed, but it's still storing? Because eventually it's going to have to be taken care of.
Yes, Madam Chair. So that's part of the difficulty that we're facing right now is when we do our military construction and we have to remove soil from the ground. Right now, our only choice is to stockpile it. And so that's what we're doing until we have a technology where we can remove the PFAS from the soil. And so we're on a pause at the moment, but your question, what I believe, was focused on how do we fund that? Which account does it come from? And so we would like to place the dirt back into the ground if we can, if the limitations would allow us. So it's partially in the military construction account because it came out of the ground through those efforts, but because we need to do the cleanup of the materials, that would indeed be in the environmental restoration account, Madam Chair.
So you do two cleanups. You do the one where you remove it so you can build the construction project. And then you have the ground set aside. Is that counted? How is that accounted for? That portion of that cleanup, is there like a column like to be cleaned up in the future? Or is that just, is the box check that's done and it's in MILCON's budget? Because we can certainly talk to the chair and ranking member of MILCON on this.
Madam Chair, I'd like to give you a more complete written answer if I may, but to give you an answer at the moment, I would offer that the disposal cost, I believe, is what we're going to have to do through the environmental restoration account.
Okay, so I think it's important that when you're done with the site, you're only done removing it from the site and placing it in another place. So it's not really, the last check hasn't been done on the checklist for the PFAS. And I would also like to know how the storage is protected so that because you're storing this stuff outdoors, that we're making sure that it's not running into streams, brooks, or percolating back down in the water again, how you're accounting for it. And you can get back to me on that. Thank you. And I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot. We're just trying to understand how this budget works, because I know sometimes we're impacted by MILCON. And so sometimes we need to talk to our partners over there on how to clean it up. So this will be helpful when you get back to us. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Calvert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think we're hitting on some of my frustration with this cleanup or supposed cleanup that's going on across the country. Many of the technologies that are being considered for cleanup of PFAS and groundwater center on the same technologies we've been using for well over a half a century. That basically is just pumping the PFAS out of the ground for filtration and then putting it into the carbon filter, then disposing the carbon in a landfill or somewhere else. And it requires an extreme amount of capital cost for these so-called pump and treat systems, and operating these pumps 24/7 are certainly far from environmentally friendly, and it seems like it never ends. So I have a base in California in my district, or right next to my district, March Air Force Base, and they have been doing this, it seems, forever, and they don't seem to be making any real progress. But there are new technologies out there, and it's difficult to get approval for these technologies, to get them in the field and to get these sites cleaned up. Such as injection of activated carbon into the PFAS contaminated aquifers has been demonstrated to effectively immobilize PFAS within the aquifer itself. Can you comment on how the DoD plans to use these in-place treatment technologies, one, to lower the cost of environmental impact of treating PFAS contamination, and finally, to clean these sites up? Is there any comment on that?
Sir, this is Mr. Kidd. So I think all of us involved share your frustration with the length and time and cost required to clean up PFAS. And that is the reality of the current technology. And that's what I referred to in my opening statement. Thanks to Congress, we have the largest research and development program in the nation to address both detection and cleanup activities. And as I said, a number of the projects that we started to fund in 2017 are now moving into the commercialization phase. Some of the technologies do require permitting by other federal agencies, and we're working closely with that. We have used the barriers that you've discussed have been used as interim response action on a number of installations where we've been able to slow, if not stop completely, the propagation of PFAS through the water tables. And we have provided to other members and their staffs a full detailed briefing on our research and development activities. We'd be happy to come back and do that with you and other members of the committee.
The frustration I have, again, is and this is affecting these communities across the country, to accelerate these technologies. The technologies, in some cases, as I understand it, that we've identified technology that destroys PFAS. And I know it's a difficult molecule to destroy, long chain molecule, but I understand those technologies are out there. And you have money to fund for procurement of these technologies and deploy those technologies, as I understand it. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
In other words, once performance testing and assessments are complete, why aren't these technologies put out in the field more rapidly?
Sure, I think we have been putting the technologies out in the field as rapidly as we can with the required level of both scientific, engineering, and safety assurance.
Well, okay. And lastly, how the current moratorium on incineration of PFAS chemicals and attended on-site storage impact your timetable? How is that being handled in your department?
Sure. No. So, sir, the EPA has published interim disposal guidance that articulates 3 pathways to disposal. One is to put the items into a landfill, either a hazardous waste landfill or appropriately lined, sealed, and monitored a landfill. The second method is through thermal technologies, and the third method is through deep well injection. We and others do not use deep well injection. In terms of thermal technologies, we have in the past and continue to research the ability to use incineration, which is right now the safest and most reliable form of thermal technologies. The research program.
Now I understand that incineration in itself doesn't destroy the molecule. Sometimes that molecule still gets into the atmosphere and then settles back down into the environment. Is that true?
So we have reviewed the scientific studies on incineration as well as our own work. And before we published the guidance that permitted incineration, I went to the CEQ and the EPA and I asked for them to review our work, given how important it is not only for us, but for the interagency. We have confidence, we have indicators that a very large portion of the PFAS molecules are in fact eliminated when the incineration is conducted for a long enough time at a high enough temperature.
I'd like to see that report when you get it available. Lastly, the replacement for PFAS. Obviously, PFAS is extremely effective at putting out fire. I mean, nobody denies that. It's been used over the years, but we've been putting a lot of money in research to find a replacement for PFAS. Are we any closer to getting something out there in the market that works as well as PFAS?
So sir, PFAS refers to over 1,600 different chemical combinations, about 600 of which are in commerce and out there in industry. Specifically in regards to the firefighting foam, we have completed testing of commercially available alternatives, and we have sent the tests on those. The results of those tests have moved forward and are being incorporated into the development of a military specification for a PFAS-free alternative.
Is it as effective as what we're using now?
It does not put out gasoline-based fires as fast as the current foam does. But we do not use gasoline in the Department of Defense except in rare circumstances. We primarily use jet fuel, and it is easier to contain and suppress jet fuel fires with PFAS-free alternatives.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll come back to that. Thank you.
I'm just going to take a second to Mr. Calvert. At the hangars that I was at where the F-35s were in Alaska, I got on my knees and started looking at the extinguishers. They were PFAS free, and the technicians, the pilots, and everybody there had great level of confidence that they had something that would take care of the job there. But that was jet fuel that I was around and looking at. Mr. Roethlisberger and then Mr. Carter.
And yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. And my question is to Ms. Borman. It's on Army Compatible Use Buffer, the ACUB program. Ms. Borman, and there might be some questions I understand that you might not be able to handle, but let's try to do our best. As you know, the Army Compatible Use Buffer program is very important to the Army's ability to train our troops, especially where a lot of land is required. It's used at places like Aberdeen Proving Ground, which is in my district, and which has a test and training range. The goal is to limit encroachment on development surrounding the installation and also limit any damage to endangered species on the installation. I was in local government for 17 years as council and county executive for about jurisdiction of 900,000, and land use and a lot of these environmental issues are extremely important to where people live and to the future of our jurisdictions. The program empowers the Army to work with land trusts, conservation entities, and state and local governments to create buffers around installation. And these partners contribute almost half of the total program cost. And that's very unique that we have outside partners that raise money to work with the government and to maintain open space. And a lot of the times we use open space for farming, we use open space for quality of life. In this situation, we're using open space to have a military base, to have training, and yet have enough land to make sure that we can do it the right way. Now, I'd like to ask about the capacity to expand this program. And I have these questions. How many requests does the Army and Installation Management Command receive for ACUB funding? And how many are you able to provide at current levels? Another question, how much capacity exists to further expand ACUB, or whatever you call it, cooperative agreements? When it comes to carrying out large-scale experiments and exercises, such as project conversions, how would you characterize current external encroachment issues? And then I want to follow up with this. Last year, the Army awarded funding to the ACUB cooperative agreement between Aberdeen Proving Ground and the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy. I would like to state for the record that I hope the Army will continue to do all it can to support Aberdeen Proving Ground's ACUB priorities. The Chesapeake Bay watershed is an area in need of continued investment. As communities spread further and further from our city centers, we must ensure that the Army doesn't suffer from encroachment of its testing and training areas. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So with regard to ACUB, The Army is very proud of what it's been able to do with ACUB, and we are very invested in the Army's compatible use buffer program. I don't have the specific numbers in front of me as to how many requests the Installation Management Command received this year, but I will absolutely take that for the record and get back to you. With regards to overall funding, the Army competes with the other services to gain REPI dollars. And so I would ask if Richard Kidd could provide you the specific information on REPI and REPI related funding, because that's our source of dollars for ACUB and our support for the ACUB program.
Let me say this. I spent 17 years as a local elected official, and a lot of that was dealing with infrastructure and the things we do in local government. And a lot of that also was in land use. And so I would like you to meet with me or someone in my office, and let's work with you to try to see what we can do, especially because I represent Aberdeen, to move forward with this project. We have willing partners that are willing to move forward. It's an example where we need to have that open space for our national security. I mean, to have national security and to also have land use come together is very unique. A lot of people who do the national security would be surprised, but it's something we need to do. So I yield back.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Carter and then Mr. Aguilar if he comes back. If not, if he's not back in time, it'll be Ms. Kirkpatrick. Mr. Carter.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. And I want to talk about something that is kind of a current event for those of us who are at Fort Hood. You know, we have the one of the few posts that has a adequate live fire range outside of Fort Irwin, California. And so we do an awful lot of live fire training at Fort Hood. And we have a lot of unexpended ordnance out there. And I've been curious about this for a long time as to what you do in a currently utilized live fire range, because historically it's been like formerly used defense sites that you cleaned up, you know, unexploded ordnance. What's the current estimate to complete cleanup for the military munitions under military munitions response program? And what is the relation between munitions and explosive cleanup and military readiness? We like to make sure that our guys go to war, our guys and gals go to war as ready as ever. What role does the availability of a workforce skilled in munition response have in the department's ability to speed along cleanup? What are the main obstacles that exist to completing cleanup of military munitions? Are you similarly concerned about shrinking workforce? And does the department have a plan to increase funding, execution, military munitions response program? And how does the department plan to balance funding for MMRP and PFAS remediation in the environmental restoration accounts? A lot of questions there.
Sir, this is Mr. Kidd. I'll start and see if I can get through some of those. So the Defense Environmental Restoration Program, the munitions response portion of which does not address cleanup on active ranges. All right, active ranges are the purview of the installation or the service that is there, and normally there's no cleanup done other than during the maintenance of the range or in the event that a round were to go outside of the range and pose an immediate health and safety measure. Our cost to complete across the MMRP program in total is right now is $11 billion, a little more than $11 billion. It's a significant amount. Currently, we see no shortage in the labor force or the industry For the MMRP program, we've talked to industry, and they realize that there's no new MMRP sites being generated. So in this case, we do believe that we have a sufficient workforce to meet those needs. And I'm sorry, I missed your last question on PFAS. If you wanted to repeat that.
Are we competing with, on the MMRP, or are we competing with the same money as the PFAS program, which is clearly a current event?
No, sir, we're not competing with the same money. I would say that on PFAS in general, the Department of Defense is sort of a leader in what will become probably a national-wide effort. So in the case of AFFF, the best that we can determine is the Department of Defense used 30, maybe 33%, 1/3 of the total AFFF used in America. So we are the largest consumer, but by no way the majority consumer. So when private industry, municipal airports, and others start to engage in the same process that we do, there could be some competition for PFAS, which goes back to the earlier question about technology. So it's so important that our research continues on the technologies. I'm also prepared to answer just briefly the question about ACUB from the previous questioner. The REPI program has increased significantly, and there's much more money available to protect lands for training, for climate resilience, and for local communities.
So if I understand you correctly, if there's a desire to clean up a live fire range, it only has if it's a danger to either the soldiers or the neighborhood before there's any cleanup. It's responsibility of the post.
Sir, we can take that as for a more detailed response, which would come from our training and readiness community. But in generally, we continue to use the live fire ranges. We have to ensure that they are safe enough for range crews to go down and work in the targets, and if there's any outlying explosive hazard. But if you'd like, we can get a more detailed response on training range maintenance.
Okay, thank you. Yield back.
Mr. Carter, would you like that for the record, to get that response
Yes.
for that for the record?
I'd like that response, please.
Perfect. Next, we will go to Ms. Kilpatrick.
Thank you, Chair McCollum, and thank you for having this hearing. My first question is for Ms. Balkas. I represent a district in southern Arizona that's home to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base and neighbors Morris Air National Guard Base. PFAS contaminants have been found in production wells above the safe levels near Davis-Monthan and threaten primary and backup sources of drinking water. The spread of these contaminants has been initially mitigated thanks to the rapid actions of the City of Tucson's Water Department. However, this has come at a significant financial cost to the city, which is bearing the brunt of the effort to protect over 700,000 residents. Ms. Balkas, a large portion of my district resides in an EPA designated sole source aquifer. So the watershed does not have an active surface water connection to an ocean where contamination can move out of the community. How does the Department of the Air Force account for different types of water systems when evaluating priorities for remediation? And do you account for closed water systems and sole source aquifers?
Thank you very much for your question, Congresswoman. So I'm happy to say that in my short 2 months in the job, I've already had some community engagement with one of the community members from Davis-Monthan. So I haven't yet met anyone from Morris yet. However, I would like to just briefly describe what our approach is for focusing on environmental restoration. So of course, first and foremost, it's protecting human health and the environment. So we want to make sure that if the drinking water is impacted, that's when we're going to provide bottled water or connect to a municipal system, et cetera. Your specific question about a sole source or sole aquifer source, that's going to be very high on our risk calculations using the relative risk scoring method that we use in the Department of Defense. So we absolutely will take that into consideration And the notes that I have here indicate that we have done all of the immediate activities to make sure that everyone has access to clean drinking water. And now we're going into the site prioritization stage where we can get after the long-term effects that we need to resolve.
Thank you very much. My second question is for Mr. Kidd regarding cleanup. The Department of Defense has identified 700 installations where the department may have released PFAS. Most are still in the preliminary assessment and site inspections phase, and only a small portion of installations are in the remedial investigation stage. So, Mr. Kidd, is the Department of Defense on track to deliver a schedule for PFAS cleanup at contaminated bases and complete preliminary assessments and site inspections for PFAS at all Department of Defense facilities as required by the fiscal year 2022 NDAA? And considering the health risks posed by PFAS, shouldn't the Department of Defense focus on installations near population centers?
Ma'am, thank you for that question. So in regards to the transition of the 700 installations through the CERCLA process, as I indicated in my open remarks, 168 have already moved to the second phase, remedial investigation. We think that an additional 62 will do so by or before the end of the fiscal year. With the 96 that we've identified as no further action, we will have, by the end of the fiscal year, completed over 300 of the 700 installations. And right now we are on track to complete the investigation by the end of 2023. I caveat that, as I indicated earlier, as the EPA develops new numbers for both screening and assessment, we may have to go back and reopen some of those earlier investigations. So some of those may continue past the 2023. This occurrence highlights one of the key features of this program, which is uncertainty. Uncertainty around standards, uncertainty around the source, how it has propagated through the medium, and where the receptors are. We prioritize risk first. We prioritize actions where communities are located, but we still have to complete much of the investigation process to understand the full parameters of the challenge, which will then allow us to build a comprehensive schedule all the way through the end of the cleanup for all 700 installations. As was pointed out earlier by the ranking member, the technology is currently pump and treat. We, the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, EPA, and others have pump and treat systems for other chemicals that are going to be in place for many multiples of decades. So that is the reality of where we are, and we don't know when we'll be done until we are actually done with the pump and treat. So that's why we're investing in new technologies to try to change that curve, bring it closer in, add some certainty to what is an inherently uncertain practice.
I know it's an enormous job, and I really appreciate your efforts. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Kirkpatrick. I'm looking at a list that got sent to us today, and I'm make sure that you have a copy of it. We just got it late. So there's, in Arizona, I'm looking really quickly at this list, and it might not be a complete list. There's 3 activities going on in Arizona. Two are in investigations, and one's a removal action. So we'll make sure that you get a copy of that, as well as being able to follow up with the Air Force. Next, we're going to hear from Mr. Diaz-Balart.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Actually, a quick question. When Mr. Calvert talked about the technology for cleanup, and again, I apologize, I'm not quite sure who responded, but talked about how you've actually given briefings about some of the new technologies and the research that you're doing. I think it would be very helpful if you have that in writing, if you could get that to us, if it's possible, that would be really, really helpful. And with that, Madam Chairman, I will yield back.
Thank you. I I appreciate that. I think that would be very helpful. And Mr. Calvert and I are aware of a couple of projects that are going on. One I don't feel like I'm at liberty to even discuss right now because I don't know where it is in the realm of things, but it holds a lot of potential. That would be a great help. Mr. Cuellar is ready for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member and all of y'all. Thank you. It's good seeing you all again. And to the witnesses, thank you for being here. I have just one short question or just ask you if y'all can follow up. A couple of years ago, I was working on an issue with the Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. And quite honestly, the department gave us a hard time. And the Air Force did, and we were trying to work with you, and it was very difficult. And the answer that we got was, we don't have money, we don't have money, we don't have money. And I understand that's an issue. I understand that. So I had to basically go to the former Armed Services Chairman, Mr. Thornberry, and we added some language to force y'all to work with us. I just want to see where we are and remediations and any sites that we have in San Antonio. I just want a status on anything going on in the San Antonio area, and ask y'all that when members ask you to work with y'all, just try to work with us instead of just saying there's no money, there's no money, there's no money, there's no money. None of y'all were on those conversations. None of y'all were the ones who are present here, but I just ask you because I think Judge and other folks have brought this up, that those are big issues, big concerns in our communities, and it was a big concern in San Antonio. So I want to thank you, and we'll work with you on the funding with the chairwoman and the ranking member, Mr. Calvert, also. But all I want is just a update on any work that you're all doing in San Antonio, Texas. And with that, I yield back to Madam Chair. It's so good seeing everybody again.
Thank
Hey,
you.
sir, before.
Well, go ahead, Mr. Kidd. If you want to add something, please do.
No, sir, just last year, in following this hearing, we provided a detailed summary of where we were in cleanup activities across your district, as well as some installations that were close to your district. I mean, the military history of San Antonio is a city that's contributed greatly to the readiness of our forces over the years, and you do have a number of sites. So we will work, our office will work with the Air Force to update that list, and if Ms. Bacchus wants anything to add, I turn it over to her.
Yeah, no, I think what you said, Mr. Kidd, is perfect. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Kidd, thank you so much. If you can just follow up with any updates on that. And thank you so much to all of y'all. Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And San Antonio, it looks like 2.758, so about $2 million, and it's under investigation. So I guess knowing where the investigation would be helpful for all of us. So thank you for your question, Mr. Cuellar. Mr. Calvert, I'm going to go to a second round of questions with the caveat that if Mr. Aguilar is able to join us, that I will take him immediately because he hasn't asked a question yet, if that's okay with you, sir.
Sure.
Okay. I want to talk about community engagement and state regulators here for a minute. And I know this is going to take a little longer than the 3 minutes, but we have an hour left. We might not use it all, but we have plenty of time. So both the DOD and the EPA are largely tasked to perform the same kind of cleanups under circular. Where most people don't think about DOD as a solution to a contamination problem because they think of things out and about in their community, especially if they don't, have a base. It might be an older ammunition site or something like that that hasn't been used for a while. So I'd like to hear from the witnesses how you engage with the servicemen and women and their families when you're on a base and around a base. But how do you engage with surrounding communities on a site that might not be active very much anymore? But I'm going to give a base example, because this is something that really struck home for a lot of us. And in Minnesota, we're cleaning up PFAS contaminated water. It's not the DOD that has responsibility for my cities of Oakdale, Woodbury, and Maplewood that are concerned about it. We're working with the private sector, and they've stood up to the task of trying to clean up the water to the best of their ability. But I do have in the northern suburbs, I have an Arden Hills facility where the water will be cleaned up for the remainder of as long as there's people on Earth. So communicating with community is really important. And I get it, both from a private sector pollution issue as well as the DOD with a former munitions plant. So let me use Camp Lejeune as an example. It had significant groundwater contamination in the last few decades, including PFAS. How was the community informed or engaged, or how are you engaging with them? So if each one of the services could talk about how you engage with communities when they either report something or when you're seeing something. And then I have a follow-up question on your work with local governments.
So ma'am, before we get to the services, I would just like to say from the department level, this administration, and particularly the Deputy Secretary, Catherine Hicks, has charged us to improve at all levels our community engagement and outreach. We recognize that these communities provide, they're where our service members live, and they provide support for our installations and our families. So at the OSD level, as I mentioned earlier, I have engaged in 4 town halls. The colleagues here have joined me for those. They've been very informative, and they have helped to guide some of our actions. We are committed to producing a more user-friendly interactive website so communities can get higher resolution data faster. And we're looking at our community engagement practices at the local level. So I would just say from the department's perspective, we recognize this is important. We've heard you, we've heard your constituents, we've made improvements, but we recognize that we have more to do. And with that, I'll turn it over to the services for some service-specific comments.
That's fabulous news. So what are you doing that's improvement? What are you learning in the town hall meetings of how you can be more effective in communication? I could call on somebody to go first. I'm a former substitute teacher, but
I can go first. This
saved
is
everybody.
So I'll go because you mentioned Camp Lejeune, and also I want to give another example too to give a fuller answer to the rest of your question about how we do these things. At Camp Lejeune, so the notifications can take on a number of channels just because we're trying to reach as many people as we can, whether they're on base or off base or used to be on base. And so that could be the installation commander, that could be the environmental program manager, that could also be the Bureau of Medicine, that could be the Navy Marine Corps Public Health Center, so we have public health centers, that could also be the personnel commands. So different commands and different channels to be able to reach depending on the audience or the population that we're trying to find. And so we try to get to everybody as best as we can. From the community point of view, there's more to it, of course, because there's also opportunity for fact sheets, there's opportunity for meetings, there's opportunities for speaking with elected officials, interested organizations, lots of opportunities to engage with people. There's something called the Restoration Advisory Board, which you heard mentioned. That's only a part of the community involvement plan. There's more to it than that, including electronic and other media outreach events. But we also keep our, reevaluate our community involvement plans periodically everywhere. And part of that is actually reaching out and doing research. Sometimes we even hire a contractor who is good at doing that to help us with the research project of getting to people and understanding what are their information needs and how do they want us to communicate. And sometimes there's surprising results. Sometimes what we think is what everybody wants, for example, an in-person meeting in a restoration advisory board is not what people want. They'd rather get a letter or a newsletter or an email or something like that. So it changes and we make it very specific to that locality. Where we do see that a restoration advisory board or any other communication channel is maybe has atrophied and needs some revitalization, we'll go and try to do an effort to re-energize that. For example, this past year in Calverton, New York, that restoration advisory board had dwindled down to, I think, one member. So we spent the better part of 2022, and now I can say that we've revitalized it. A lot more community members have come into the restoration advisory board, and there's more participation in the meetings too, as well as additional information. So when we see that something is maybe not happening as energetically as we'd like, we're not shy about reaching out. And by the way, sometimes people are worried about, why are you asking me? And in this case, there was hesitancy at first from the community. What are you up to? There was a little bit of questioning, why are we reaching out? And it took a while to earn that trust that, no, we really are interested in making this better than it is.
Does anybody want to add anything, or I'll go to state regulators?
So, ma'am, if I just, Madam Chair, this is Amy Borman, if I just may add a few comments. From the Army's perspective, we've empowered all of our installation commanders, and we have given them all of the materials that they need to be able to meet with their communities, whether they're off installation or on installation. And we have risk managers who have provided them guidance and advice on how to communicate with those communities about what may or may not be coming off of the installation or impacting them. And we found, as Mr. O has said, that very local community engagement is really the most valuable, because those installation commanders live in the community and work in the community. And so they're really the ones that we try to empower to be able to speak on behalf of the Army and explain the concerns associated with the installation.
Well, empower is a lovely word if people choose to take what they're empowered with and use it. So I'm sure that that you go back and make sure that the commanders are actually doing everything to the best of their ability and perhaps beyond. You go back and reaffirm and check that, because each base, can be run differently, depending upon what's going on. I mean, some of these commanders are getting ready to, rapid deployment, doing things. I mean, there's a lot asked of them. So you go back and help them if they need it?
So yes, Madam Chair, we do. And we have gone back a couple of times and surveyed our installation commanders and determined what they have or have not been communicating to the community and how many communication engagements they've had. And
Okay.
So we do have a mechanism to go back and ask those questions. And if there are concerns, we do have the ability to bring our public health center in to be able to also speak with the communities and provide risk engagement and risk discussion.
Madam Chair, from the Air Force perspective, I just wanted to add that there's sometimes community interest groups that we want to specifically target. And so I would just add, in addition to what my two colleagues have already said, that we pursue, for example, the Alaska and the Hawaii Native American groups to make sure that they're getting a voice in the process. Sometimes it's incumbent on us to go pursue their opinions and their insight to make sure that we're getting the entire community and not just those that might want to respond to an email or a flyer or a mailer.
Okay. The next thing I have is a follow-up, and Ms. Bacchus, she teed this up perfectly, and I'm going to ask this to be for the record, but I'm going to put on what I'm asking on the hearing today. The DoD has authority under Title 10, Section 27(0)D to enter into cooperative agreements with a state, agency, or tribe to assist with carrying out the responsibilities under the Environmental Restoration Program. This includes identification, investigation, and cleanup of any offsite contamination resulting from the release of hazardous substance or waste at a facility under DoD's jurisdiction. DoD exercises this authority in part through a defense and state memorandum agreement, a program which allows the DoD to reimburse the states, and I would hope it would also include in some cases local governments and territories. I think of all the cleanup going on in Villegas and Puerto Rico for eligible regulatory services like technical review of documents, site visits, public participation support, restoration advisory boards, identification and explanation of requirements, and quality assurance and quality control sampling and analysis, all of which support the DoD in the execution of the defense environmental restoration programs. Now, I am very familiar with cooperative agreements established in the cleanup of the Twin Cities Army Ammunitions Plant, TCAP, located in Arden Hills, where the local government is conducting treatment of drinking water and being reimbursed by the DoD through a judgment fund, which is different than most of the funds that you're using when you're working with local units of government. So I am interested in knowing how frequently this authority is used, where else it's, how it's being used to support or alleviate burden on state regulators. Could this be a tool used more often to help avoid bottlenecks and advance sites through through reviewed pipelines? Could this help speed things up if this is used properly? And then, so what I'd like you to do is provide for the record how much assistance has been provided to states, tribal organizations, or our territories with this authority over the past 5 years. How much help has really gone out to them? Because I have with me a copy of the Army Corps Defense and State Memorandum of Agreement, and it says that the CAS allows. It doesn't say must or will. It says allow. So I'm curious as to how often this is used. And if states are aware that that's out there for them to use, or if they are in territories in that, or if they have to be relied on outside people that they have to hire to help them when this is going through, can be a very substantial burden on local governments. So you can take that for the record, Mr. Kidd, unless you'd like to kind of say something at 30,000 feet about it. I know it's rather technical what I asked.
No, ma'am. So the DSMOA program, Defense State Memorandum Agreement, is very important to the success of our efforts, and we rely significantly upon local environmental and regulatory authorities. I would not say that there's an impediment now or that it's slowing down the pipeline, but I share your concern that as the PFAS cleanup goes through the CERCLA process, and we have more removal actions, more remedial actions, more long-term actions in place, each of which requires sort of regulatory review by the state authorities. As we anticipate this program's growth, we should also anticipate a growth in the requirements on our state environmental regulators and permitters. So I would sort of share a sense of, I share your sense of possibility that this could be a constraint. Overall, we do have 53 DSMOAs in place right now. Only Arkansas, North Dakota, and the Virgin Islands do not have a DSMOA with the department. And we have 52 cooperative agreements. To date, we've provided just under $32 million to state regulators. And last year, we provided $3.1 million to RABs across the country. I do think that as we look to reinvigorate the RAB program and a supporting program, the Technical Assistance for Public Participation, the TAP program, that these are all sort of three activities, states, RAB, and TAP, where we should look to maximize the involvement of communities and regulators so that we don't face any delays as we go into public commentary or state review. But we will take this for the record and give you the exact figures and numbers.
I think that would be very helpful because my office had to get involved with the TCAP arsenal on another site, Round Lake. And it was absolutely amazing to me, in my opinion, and I don't say this lightly, I say this with a heavy heart, the pediments that the Army kept putting up time and time again with what U.S. Fish and Wildlife was even saying was needed to happen for remediation and for what the local units of government wanted to do. The Army just kept pushing a third alternative. And the amount of time and energy that local units of government, the state of Minnesota, and even Fish and Wildlife had to put in was something that got resolved with what the community of interest and Fish and Wildlife asked for the first time was just baffling to me, the amount of lawyer hours that got put into this. So I think we can do better. And I'm hearing from all of you that there's a different attitude, there's a different change. I take you at your word for it. And that's exciting to hear. So Mr. Calvert, if you have a second question, Mr. Russenberger, and then if any of the members that are still on it, if you could email Chris Bigelow, if you have a question other than that, we'll be wrapping this up shortly. Mr. Calvert.
Just real quick, the old saying, if you're in a hole, quit digging. And I just went for the record. Obviously, this old, I think I can pronounce it correctly, the aqueous film forming technology, which no one disputes is extremely effective at putting out fire. Is it still being used?
Sir, it is only being used in an emergency response or if it can be properly contained and disposed of. So we have eliminated the use of AFFF. Yeah, I've been at it for 18 months. I can't get it right either. Anyway, AFFF, we've eliminated use for training and testing unless we can contain it, and then only in the event of an emergency response.
Okay, so yes, it is being used, but in rare circumstances where you believe it can be contained or properly disposed of.
Yes, sir. We also unfortunately have incidents of accidental discharge, which we report to Congress within 48 hours. So we do have a reporting requirement on accidental discharge. And as you heard from some of the deputy assistant secretaries, particularly the Air Force, they've taken steps now to reduce the possibility of discharge in their hangars.
Okay. Secondly, it's the chair and my job is to try to fund things as effectively and efficiently as possible. Obviously, this PFAS cleanup is enormously expensive and growing. Especially using these existing technologies. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but if you have technologies that have been proven to work, that are much cheaper and more effective, by the way, let's not waste a lot of time getting to it, because the quicker we can clean up these sites, especially these old sites, and put it back into economic activity, the better off we all are going to be, and it saves money in the long run. So that's the only comment I wanted to make, Madam Chair, and with that, I'll be happy to yield back.
Mr. Rusenberger, do you have a follow-up question? You're on mute. I'm wondering if you have a follow-up question or comment. Mr. Calvert and I are likely going to close up if you don't.
I do.
Okay, please.
Okay,
proceed.
good. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Mr. Kidd. Mr. Kidd, the climate change is altering the strategic context in which the joint force operates. I'm particularly concerned about the Arctic, which is warming faster than other parts of the world and causing sea level to rise at a rate that is threatening critical infrastructure and supply chains. How is the Defense Department and how are their assets and the installations being impacted? I represent Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and I'm concerned about issues involving Aberdeen as all the other bases in our country. The Defense Department assets and installations that are being impacted are again high priority for us. What is DoD investing in that critical or for mission and safety of our service members that meet our climate goals? I will be at the Naval Academy tomorrow for the commissioning of class of 2022. While the subcommittee has been concerned about the investment in infrastructure needs at all of our great service academies, Annapolis is particularly vulnerable to sea level rise. The subcommittee last year had to make a considerable increase for infrastructure repairs in Annapolis, given that Mr. Hohen Asian, I hope I got it right, what are you doing to ensure that sea level rise is accurately accounted for in infrastructure needs through the budget process?
So, sir, this is Mr. Kidd, and
yes.
Climate change is an issue of extreme importance to the department. It is altering our geostrategic environment. It is adversely affecting our installations and infrastructure. It is creating increased operational demands on the force, whether it's the National Guard fighting forest fires, or whether it is requirements on our forces overseas, and is it degrading the performance of our service members and their equipment, particularly so in the Arctic. Our Department has now created a new Deputy Assistant Secretary of Policy, who is her purview to look at Arctic security matters. Our team works at climate adaptation and mitigation. I would be happy to provide you a brief on that, but I would direct your attention that for the first time in this year's budget submission, there has been a J book prepared outlining $3.1 billion or so of investments that the department is making that will have effects that are investments that are in response to climate threats or threats to our installations. So we can take as a due out to provide you directly and your team that J book and to follow up with a detailed briefing, unless Mr. Onesian has anything to add about Annapolis.
No, we will. I would like to take it for the record and provide a fuller response. I could give a partial response because of the environmental piece, but it's a lot bigger question than that. It's infrastructure, and we'll come back with the fuller answer.
Oh, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Ritzenberg. I'd be interested if you have them come if it works mutually in our schedules to be present when you're getting that information. And we'll let other members know too. Thank you. Mr. Calvert, anything you want to say before I close?
No, Madam Chair, thank you. Very interesting hearing. I certainly thank the witnesses for being here today and informing us. And with that, I yield back.
Well, thank you. As you know, we care about all contamination, and we want to see it get cleaned up from unexploded ordnance to trace elements that are sometimes left in the ground after an arsenal closes, and many, many other things. But as you know, PFAS and PFOA contamination sites, the monitoring, the sampling, and the remediation of those sites, and maybe continued upgrade remediation. We've done that with our drinking water here in Minnesota. So I hear you loud and clear that as the EPA learns more about the harmful effects of this, sometimes we have to go back and get it done even better. So thank you for pointing that out. The importance of partnering with state and local governments in research and development technologies as the DoD finds and discovers things, as Mr. Calvert put up, getting that information out to local units of government and being able to work with them on how to get things right is going to be really important too. And you play a unique role in the research and development that you're doing on that. I'm excited to hear the change in direction and the way you're doing engagement and the enthusiasm all of you bring to this job. I know Secretary Austin, I actually had a conversation about environmental remediation with General Milley back a while ago. So I'm very excited at this, the administration's push on this. But I am disappointed, and this is, once again, you don't set the numbers. I am disappointed at the way that we saw the numbers go down. So I look forward to hearing where you are on cleanup activities and other things that I asked for the record. So thank you very much. This is a tough topic to talk about because pollution is something we have to address and clean up, and the Department of Defense has a lot in its backlog of cleanup. So I want to thank each and every one of you for your testimony today. Mr. Kidd, to both, to all three of the services here. And I noticed that even your colleagues went with Mr. O. So thank you very much for your work on this. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.